You know certainly the feeling in your stomach when one of your friends, your sister, your brother, your mother, your cat, your dog, especially your child, hurts her himself. So like stepping unknowingly but energetically on a nail on the floor with its sharp side facing the ceiling. So those of you who have a cat know probably the feeling when in your whole body, like the vibration and maybe a poking in your stomach, when you try to leave the house and you open the door and your cat tries to run out as well and you don't see the cat, and you close the door, the cat screams, you scream, and you know the feeling in your stomach and your whole body, you're kind of shaking a little bit maybe, depends how much connection you have. So you suffer nearly as much as your cat, and you try to do everything to calm her down, to fix the situation. Or think about refugees in Europe, what they go through, or think about the victims of the shootings in Paris. So here we have examples of empathy, right? So nearly everybody knows what it is to have empathy. And that's exactly what some politicians or civilians, even scientists, are pointing out, that this kind of empathy we need nowadays. We need an empathic society. And here it's a little bit tricky. So there is a professor, his name is Paul Bloom, and he's from the Yale University in Massachusetts. And he's a professor of psychology and cognitive science, and he did actually some research on empathy and found out that just empathy is not efficient to ease the suffering or even to create a peaceful society. So empathy alone, he says, so he is a bit radical now, and if you just take one or two sentences of his writings and his researches, he says empathy alone makes us blind, in the sense that we are way too emotional, and so we are not clear to help another person who is in need. So he did some research on that and found out that actually empathy alone can make one revengeful. He says what we need is compassion. Not just empathy, but compassion with a tick of empathy. So per definition, compassion is the combination of feeling some sensitivity to suffering and the motivation to elevate it. So empathy and compassion is kind of tangled up with each other. In a scientific approaches, he himself is saying these are different things. But when he's going more in detail, when you actually read his studies and his writings, then he speaks about nuances of compassion and empathy. So the sensitivity we need is the ability to witness another's suffering and to be able to be touched by that. When we then feel some movement within oneself, we develop a motivation to help. So that's helpful, that's really something positive. His Holiness even says, if you want to be happy, practice compassion. He is not saying if you want to be happy, practice empathy. So, but it's not saying that we don't need empathy at all. We need some empathy to understand the experience of others. It's almost impossible to help others without having empathy. We need some of that. And so there is a fine line to get a taste of another person's feeling, and then we use a more rational mindset to get some distance. So versus being totally tangled up in emotions, and to think, what could I do to help this person now or later? So Bloom actually faced a lot of criticism because he did not explain it in less sentences what he meant when he said empathy actually makes us blind. So there was a big outscream in American society. I heard that he was saying something like, I don't know, something like there's no emotion, you can't have emotions towards kitten. It's something, he said something what is not, what people can't even imagine. You know, in people's framework there is empathy is necessary. Empathy we need to have in our growing up when we are children, a mother towards a child, and in society, you know, when we want to have a social society where we interact with each other. So he is clear that empathy and compassion support one another. He is just throwing out empathy alone would paralyze us, would make us to victims, and make us dependent on others in an unhealthy way. So I think this criticism is not unusual. I think that is explainable because we are very much driven by empathy in society, because when we just think about, like, let's take the film industry, we need empathy to be able to follow. I mean, we don't need it, but it's film are set up so that the one who watches the film really gets tangled up with the actor's role, right? And all the emotions come up. That's very natural. That's what the filmmakers are looking for. So, or even politicians and or politicians itself use empathy to rationalize a war towards terrorism, for example, right? So, but here it's empathy in extreme. You know, he is kind of pointing out that empathy alone is not helpful for oneself and for others if we interact with each other. In general, he is saying empathy serves to dissolve the boundaries between one person and another. It is a force against selfishness and indifference. But he says also clearly, empathy is biased. We are more prone to feel empathy for attractive people and for those who like us or share our ethnic and national background. And empathy is narrow. It connects us to particular individuals, real or imagined, but it's insensitive to numerical differences and statistical data. As Mother Teresa says, or put it, if you look at the many, I will never act. If you look at one, I will. So laboratory studies find that, he says, that we really do care more about the one than about the many, so long as we have personal information about the one. So, and he emphasizes, and we as Buddhists do fully agree with that, that compassion with a note of empathy can be trained. So there's a lot of research as well in the science section, in the neuroscience section. For example, Tanya Singer with Mathieu Ricard. So they looked at both sections of empathy and compassion, taking just Mathieu Ricard as an example, as a monk who was practicing meditation. So they set him under circumstances where they asked him to develop compassion, and he was able, they figured out that some parts in the brain are activated that normal people who are not practicing compassion don't have that. So then they asked him to put his mindset in a situation where he feels just empathy. And there he came out of it, and they asked him, what do you feel? And he said he felt overwhelmed, he felt distressed, he felt something like a burnout. So, and then he also got asked to do, since he is able to do both meditations, you know, to combine the sense of empathy with a more distant perspective of having a more rational mind, a mind that can also think, besides having an understanding of the suffering of the person or situation, can also think what actually can help here, not being totally tangled up within one's own emotions that can't help another. So, and he, through his training, is able to balance that, right? And that scientific researchers making it clear that now we have the tools, we can train, we can go a step further out of just empathy and develop compassion that is actually helpful for oneself and for others. And I found it personally very helpful because in the very beginning of my path, I thought I have compassion when I suffered with another's being. I tingled it totally up, and I was de-stressed actually in another's suffering. And having it more clear now, knowing what is actually compassion and how to develop compassion, it's very powerful, because then I really know I'm staying within my own power. I'm not losing myself. I'm not starting to depend on others, on their support, or wanting something even from the suffering person, him herself. You know what I mean? Like the cat who got hurt on the tail, like trying to fix it immediately because I can't bear the suffering. Now I can watch it and I can kind of be more clear about what needs to be done here in that situation. Yeah. So the summary of all that is then that compassionate helping is good for ourselves, for others, but empathetic distress or personal distress, it's more common, is destructive of the individual in the long run. So let's practice compassion with a stick of empathy.